today my name is not Professor Daniele Iancu-Agou, surprise, surprise. And her name is here because she's here because, well, this actually comes back to ideas that we've been speaking about, the physical aspects and the spiritual aspects. So physically, I'm almost 100% certain she's not here, but spiritually, she did send us a text, and so I guess in some way she is here. We thought about what we wanted to do in this session because she cancelled just last week or a week before that. Okay, 2 weeks ago, and by that time both Ram Ben-Shalom and Amir Ashur, who I'll introduce in a second, had already started their work on preparing the text, and I figured that since we are all scholars and most of us make a living, all of us I think make a living from reading texts, we should, even without Daniele being here, I think we can still have a look at the text, hear what the responses were going to be, and discuss the text. I will say that this also gives us an opportunity, as you'll see with Amir is going to, as part of his response, he told me he was going to use our database. And our database is something that we wanted anyhow to show you and showcase, and hopefully get you all involved. All those who are not involved yet, get you all involved in the, not yet. Get you all involved in the database. So, because the database is something that is collaborative and needs we need help from everyone in this room. So we'll see how this goes. We'll read the text. We'll look at the text. We'll read them. We'll hear the responses. We'll talk a little about the database. We intend to end at the latest at 7 o'clock. The bus will, or 10 to 7 or so, because the bus was waiting to take us to eat, if you haven't eaten enough already. And we'll see how things go. Yes, and we have to say something about tomorrow, of course, what's happening. So remind me to do it. We'll remind you to do that before the end. Okay, so first of all, let me present those who are sitting to my left and right, who I'm sure you all know now. Ram Ben-Shalom is one of the organizers of the conference. He's also a professor of the history of the Jewish people at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the director of the Center Hispania Judaica. He's a member of our academic board and chair of the International Society for Sephardic Studies. He's published widely on medieval European Jewish history and is a specialist in the Jewish-Christian discourse in the Middle Ages. His book, The Jews of Provence, Renaissance, in the Shadow of the Church, is forthcoming, and which makes him a great expert on these texts anyhow. So I'm glad he's here. He's also the co-author of Conflict and Religious Conversation in Latin Christendom Studies known as Orally More, which came out in Brepols in 2014. And he's currently working on a collection of letters of a Jewish scribe from Aragon, and is writing an intellectual monograph on Isaac Natan, who's if you've never heard of him, is an absolutely fascinating character from Arles. And Amir Ashur, to my left, is a senior researcher in the center, and his main field is the Cairo Geniza, of which he is. I have to say, if anyone knows anything about the Cairo Geniza, it's this man here sitting to my left. He deals with documents related to family and marriage life in 12th century Egypt, and the relationship between Jewish and Muslim law regarding marriage and family. He deals with trade to India, again through the documents of the Geniza, and the history of medicine and Maimonides. He's also a visiting scholar at the Taylor Shechter Geniza Research Unit in Cambridge University, and we benefit greatly from that connection as well. Okay, Ram, are you going to read the text? So we're starting with Ram, and then Amir.
Yes, please. So, okay. I'm going to read the first text of Daniele Iancu. Actually, this is the main focus of my response to the two texts. So I'm concentrating on the first text. So let's read this one. We don't have a number of page here, but it's session 7, yeah. And no, we don't have. Yeah. Okay. But I'm going to read only the text.
Okay.
Right? Not.
Go ahead.
You can read the preface of Daniele Iancu by yourself. But, I'm going to concentrate on the text, which is a paragraph from Chronicle of Ram Ben-Shalom from Arles. Okay, in the year 1408, the 5th of May, a Jew was baptized, who was the son of Master Abraham, a practicing physician here from Arles, and Regina, daughter of the Jew Meister Benedict, a practicing physician here from Arles, who was nicknamed Bonnet. Likewise, King Louis let him get baptized. The truth is that a knight called Monson took him under his protection. Likewise, the Archbishop of Arles, Messier Artaud, was present with his mitre on the head, and the name of the godson was Louis Raymond. Likewise, King Louis provided a catafalque, and on the catafalque a tent, a baptismal font, and there was he baptized. Likewise, as soon as he was baptized, they brought him to the altar of Saint Trophime of Arles, as he was dressed, and there they accomplished 6 orders, and he was accomplished. He made his reverence to King Louis, who was present there, and he thanked for the alms he had made on his behalf. And he came closer behind the king. And they heard the mass that was recited by a monk of Saint Peter of Montmajour, who sang on this day a new mass in the presence of the king, the Archbishop of Arles, several knights, and other people. Likewise, after the mass was said, they went to have dinner in the king's house, and after they had dinner, Louis, the aforementioned king's godson, went to the pardon of Saint Peter of Montmajour with other sirs of the kings, and that pardon was general by that time. That's the end of this paragraph, written as you see in the Provençal, Occitan. Okay, now my response to Daniele Iancu. In his chronicle, Bertrand Boisset of Arles described the baptism ceremony of Bonnet Avigdor, which took place in 1408. This fascinating account offers readers a concrete illustration of the importance ascribed by Christianity in the Middle Ages to the conversion of a single Jew, and of the way in which the sacrament of baptism was used to stage a public demonstration of the victory of Christianity over Judaism. In addition to the Archbishop of Arles, Artaud de Melun, the ceremony was attended by Louis II of Anjou, Count of Provence and King of Naples, as well as knights of the royal household. The name Louis, given to Avigdor, is also indicative of royal patronage. Although part of the ceremony and prayer service was held inside the Cathedral of Saint Trophime, Boisset stresses that both eminent figures and ordinary people were in attendance, and that during the course of the ceremony, the neophyte was given his new clothing, an important ritual element which, as Daniele Iancu points out, signifies not only the convert's rebirth, but also passage to a higher social station. At this point in his description, Boisset reiterates the physical proximity between the convert and King Louis. I quote, "and he came closer behind the king." A part of the ceremony, however, did take place outside the cathedral, where a special stage was set up with a baptismal font and covered by a tent, entirely commissioned and paid for by the king. Boisset's familiarity with the details of the preparation for the ceremony shows that it was undoubtedly accompanied by royal propaganda intended to give the event the widest possible exposure. Although Boisset does not tell us what went on outside the church during the baptism, it is safe to assume that the public preparations for the ceremony and the presence of the king and the archbishop would have drawn a large crowd, and that the conversion of a member of the Avigdor family, part of the Jewish haute bourgeoisie, comprising intellectual and community leaders, would have been seen as further proof of the veracity of the Christian religion and of the king's untiring efforts in matters of faith. The ceremony also conveyed to the Jews of Arles and Provence the message that all strata of Christian society expected them to emulate Bonnet and, like him, to choose the path of baptism. Bonnet Avigdor of Arles was the son of Abraham Ben-Shalom Avigdor, who was the first Jewish student known to have studied at the university in Montpellier. He later became an important Latin to Hebrew translator and the author of a number of works on philosophy and logic. In 1379, at Arles, he translated Gérard de Solo's treatise on fevers. The Hebrew title is Mevo HaNe'arim. In the introduction to this work, Avigdor describes his studies at the university, which he calls the yeshiva, and I quote, "Said Abraham Avigdor, this is the father, yes? Not the convert. Said Abraham Avigdor, when I went up to the mountain is Montpellier, this is the mountain. When I went up to the mountain to hear the sciences of medicine from the Christian doctors and sages in the distinguished yeshiva in the city of Montpellier, for there is the seat of the ancient sages and the source of that science." End of quote. Similarly, some 2 years later, at the end of the translation of a treatise on the digestion by the Christian scholar Arnaud de Villanova, the original Latin of which appears to have been lost, he wrote, I quote, "And this revelatory scroll, Megillah Megala, a play on words in Hebrew, and this revelatory scroll is completed, written by the universal sage," this is philosopher, "Arnaud de Villanova, and I, Abraham Ben-Shalom Avigdor, when I was at the distinguished yeshiva in the city of Montpellier, found it among the rooms of the sage physicians and in their hidden places. And I desired it and translated it in the year 141 of the 6th millennium." It's 1380. Here at Arles. The expression "in their hidden places" indicates that the Latin text was not readily accessible in the library, but rather hidden in the teacher's room. This is not the only testimony to attempt by circles within the university to prevent Jewish students from acquiring the latest medical knowledge. Over the years, most of the Jewish students, apparently including Bonnet himself, studied medicine privately, since study at the university had long been closed to them. This method of private study also explains the ties of marriage between the various Jewish medical dynasties. Upon concluding their studies, they were required to take official exams under the auspices of the municipal or district authorities. Practicing medicine without a license could incur heavy fines. In 1402, Bonnet's brother, Solomon Avigdor of Arles, submitted his thesis to 4 physicians, 3 Jews and 1 Christian, who was in fact his private teacher, the Christian. In the course of their professional lives, Jewish physicians developed close ties with members of the Christian haute bourgeoisie, as well as church officials, as in the case of Ben-Gurion, physician to the family of the Archbishop of Arles, 1442, and even the rulers of Provence, as in the case of Ben-Gurion of Arles, physician to the Queen Jeanne, Johanna. Were these ties behind the many voluntary conversions among these Jewish families? Or was it perhaps the intimate knowledge of Christian religion and culture that stemmed from constant contact with Latin texts? The Latin medical texts that members of the Avigdor family translated were not entirely devoid of religious content, and religious polemics were part of the discourse between Christian and Jewish physicians. This is apparent from Abraham Avigdor's account of attempt at the University of Montpellier to hide and limit access to medical texts to Christian students only, a phenomenon described in greater detail by Leon Yosef de Carcassonne, who also refers to private debates between Christian and Jewish physicians. Another dynasty of physicians and translators that paralleled the Avigdor family in Arles was the Natan family, headed by Yehuda Bongodos Natan and his son Don Kreskas Natan, mentioned in the response of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshet, Ribash, along with Don Astruk Salomon Avigdor, as a member of a religious court that had recorded testimony in the home of Abraham Avigdor. Kreskas Natan's son, Yitzchak Natan, the most important figure in Provençal Jewry in the 15th century, has been the focus of my research for many years. In his book, Me'ametz Koach, Fortifying Strengths, probably written in the mid-15th century, Yitzchak Natan refers to the phenomenon of conversion in Aragon, in the wake of the Tortosa Disputation and the sermons of the Dominican preacher Vicente Ferrer. Vicente Ferrer is also the link between the chronicler Bertrand Boisset and Yitzchak Natan. The only other reference to Jews in Boisset's chronicle, beyond the story of Bonnet Avigdor's conversion, pertains to the sermons preached by Ferrer in Arles in 1400. Boisset was so impressed with these sermons that he claimed that such rousing sermons had not been heard since the time of apostles. In order to emphasize the tremendous influence exerted by Ferrer in the city, Boisset notes that the Jews of Arles attended all of his sermons. In my opinion, Yitzchak Natan witnessed these powerful events as a child. Ferrer preached at the Dominican monastery in the cities of Saint-Martin district, which also included the Jewish quarter. A house owned by Natan's mother, Ben-Gurion Natan, was in fact adjacent to the monastery. They had a joint wall. This is probably the background behind Natan's statement in Me'ametz Koach, I quote, "And there was there, in Spain, an excellent preacher, Maestre Vincenz, who would preach every evening and morning and would not hold his peace, speaking wondrously clearly to understand and instructing them in the roots of their beliefs, that it might become second nature to them by way of emulation." According to Natan, Ferrer's sermons and the new legislation in Aragon were directed at converso society and meant to instill in them a proper Christian spirit. It is interesting to note that Natan depicts Ferrer's efforts at shaping the Christian identity of the conversos as resting on an unmitigated racial disqualification of the Jewish life from which they had come. And here I read the first paragraph in the handout that I have here. Number 1. There came the day of their Passover, when the preacher rose, as was his habit, and spoke about the death of Jesus, and amazed with the story, telling it in its lengths and its widths, and called out from his throat in a great voice that the revenge of his crucified God brought the eternal punishment of the Jews. Here I slightly changed my translation, that forever remains conclusive proof of the pointless crime they committed, and that one day of every month of the year, worms will be found in their mouths, and they will urinate blood in exchange for the blood which they spilled. And while the Jews think that in order to atone for the blood, they will steal a small Christian child and slaughter him on Passover, and sacrifice his blood to their God, and thus think that this will heal their sores. End of quoting. The effeminate, murderous, and racial figure of the Jew in the fictitious sermon by Ferrer seeks to rehabilitate the fundamental dogmas of Christian Christology by portraying a mirror image. The Jewish male's menstruation is the divine punishment for the spilling of Jesus' blood. The ritual murder of Christian children is a Jewish attempt to bring about self-redemption and ritual cleansing, which essentially corroborates the confession and self-recognition by the Jews of their sinful role in the murder of Christ. An examination of the sermons actually delivered by Ferrer in Castile and Aragon does not match the rhetoric attributed to him by Yitzhak Natan. We may discern in some of Ferrer's sermons the Pauline Augustinian image of the Jew, the view of fleshy Judaism, the theological role of which was to confirm the victory of spiritual Christianity. At the same time, we are in the sphere of literary invention, and as far as Yitzhak Natan and 15th century Jewry was concerned, Vicente Ferrer was a symbolic representative of Christianity and its mission. As such, the Jews saw Ferrer using his sermons to attack Judaism, mobilizing a literary and oral arsenal that had developed in the late Middle Ages: theological racism, demonization, and blood libels. This new phenomenon, which among other things gave birth to the Converso Society of Spain, required an immediate response, and also forced the Jews to redefine their collective identity in order to mark the boundaries of their existence. The Jews had to clearly mark the border between Jew and Christian, and to determine whether the conversos belonged to the religious cultural entity known as the Jewish people. The question for the Jews, in other words, was whether to draw the line separating Judaism and Christianity as running between themselves and the established Christian population, or running between them and the conversos. Or perhaps we are talking about a no man's land, a borderland, that should best be left without definitive boundaries. Answers to questions concerning a new collective identity were offered in a variety of spheres: in halakha, responsa, moral thought, philosophy, poetry, daily relationships, and social and economic intercourse. Let us take a closer look at Yitzhak Natan's view of the situation. His text, from which I quoted earlier, continues by describing the response of the conversos to Ferrer's racist sermon. This is number 2, the paragraph number 2 in the header. When the converts heard these 3 lies and truly understood that this was nothing, that they themselves are their own witnesses, the plague of heresy grew up in them and in their face, and some of them escaped to the wide tracts of the earth. Those that grew and became rich and were plentiful in population and could not escape, cleverly decided to become a fraternity, and they became a united one. And they undertook the commandment to give half a shekel to each person every week, and they made a charity fund and did an even greater deed of charity in fraternity and amicability, in supporting the poor and to marry young women. And they built for themselves a shrine, and they chose some of their men to serve in the shrine and to worship there, and they enlisted from among themselves preachers who would sermonize to them in emulation of the other Gentiles about the roots of their faith, which they have come to as a shelter, but not the deceptions and lies and imagined miracles like other preachers tried. And thus their practice has continued until this day. And they are all men of grace, men of action, men of truth, who do good deeds, notables who find more grace and honor than the people of those districts. They worship the God and do not become haughty or follow adventures of falsehood. From out Vincent Ferrer's lies, the opposite came, and instead of what he sought to shape as the new face in their heart, to what they converted to, he led them to deny and doubt that which was correct and true. In contrast to the ambivalent and critical attitude of other Jews toward the conversos, Yitzhak Natan offers numerous superlatives in describing their new life. It seems that he draws the boundary of Jewish collective identity far beyond the borderlands. But it is also important to note what Natan does not say here. He does not mention the conversos' observance of the Sabbath or any other attempts on their part to observe the principal Jewish mitzvot. He does not emphasize the conversos mitzvah of charity. He does emphasize the conversos mitzvah of charity, but this finds a stronger expression in Christianity. Likewise, the description of charity associations in converso society, which we know existed in Aragon and Castile according to Chaim Beinart, principally in the first half of the 15th century, does not depict a distinctly Jewish phenomenon. The Jewish identity of the conversos is identified here by the belief in one God, their God, and the thorough rejection of the Christian belief in the Holy Trinity. Mitzvot do not constitute a condition for being defined as a Jew. One can make do with a common social life that includes sermons addressing questions of faith, the content of which are fundamentally distinct from Christian sermons. We are speaking of a collective identity that took shape while distancing itself from the other. And yet, one has to be precise, to read between the lines, and attempt to recognize the subtle contour which Yitzhak Natan gives to the Christian other. Did Natan, like Ferrer, try to create a demonic, threatening other, or a ridiculous other, one whose negative characterization should be exaggerated as much as possible so that the more vulgar and profanities, the easier it will be to offer an antithetical characterization of a lofty Jewish spirituality? This will then make it possible to sharpen the picture of a collective Jewish identity. It seems to me that the answer to this question is negative. In terms of faith, Natan presents the readers with the classic dichotomy between a single God and a divine Trinity, between one and many, while of course rejecting out of hand the Christian mission and its anti-Semitic racist content. And yet Natan concludes his remarks with these sentences. I quote again, "From out of Vincent Ferrer's life, the opposite came, and instead of what he sought to shape as a new faith in their heart, to what they converted to, he led them to deny and doubt that which was correct and true in their new faith." Here I put it, in their new faith. That is to say, Ferrer's racist moralizing and prevarications regarding the Jewish other failed, and not just because they pushed the converted toward a collective existence as a fraternity of grace that rejected the Trinity. Ferrer's project was a colossal failure in that it alienated the conversos from the positive religious aspect of Christianity, from that which was correct and true. Natan does not provide here details of what was correct and true in Christianity, but from other sections of his work, it is clear that he was referring to important moral theological views that were based in the Christian tradition and were absent from Jewish intellectual discourse. It appears that Natan sought to push the envelope, that is to draw the boundaries of Jewish identity to their maximum extent, far beyond the borderlands. This tolerant approach embraced by Yitzhak Natan was rooted in a Provençal halachic philosophical tradition, the best known exponent of which was Menachem Meir, that rejected the classification of Christianity as a form of idolatry and in fact identified positive elements within it. Many Provençal Jewish scholars maintained constant dialogue with Christianity, of which polemics were only a part. Latin literature and literacy were an important value in the Natan family, as demonstrated by Yitzhak Natan's mother's will, published by Daniele Iancu. Voluntary conversion also affected the Natan family, and the number of Yitzhak's grandchildren converted, including his grandson René, whose conversion Iancu presumes to have been under the patronage of good King René. In my estimate, this constant discourse with Christianity was a central factor in individual conversions. Many of the physicians and community leaders, such as Avraham Avigdor and Yitzhak Natan, remained steadfast in their Jewish identity, although they expanded its boundaries, as I have shown, to include some converso groups. Others, however, chose to convert, partly for social reasons, it would seem, but also due to an attraction toward Christian culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. I think we got more than we bargained for, and that was great. And,
yes, I'll
Amir.
stand up with your permission. Okay, so when I first got this text and was asked to respond on it, I was a bit worried because it's far from my subject of scholarship. I mean, it's in Europe, it's not in the Middle East, and it's 15th century, it's not 12 or earlier. But I decided, yes, I'll take the challenge, and I read the text, and in the first 2 lines, something strikes me. The fact that this convert was from a family of physicians. And then I recall that I encountered few converted physicians during my work on the database. So as you know, one of the main features of this center is to build a database of all the known convert and conversions and text regarding conversion and interpretations and encounters. And we are doing each and every one of us is responsible for entering data to this database. So there is now a database in which I can check how many physicians are listed as converted. And so let's go to the individual search. We'll go down to profession and we'll write physician. Whoops. And we'll go to search, of course.
Amir, can we darken the room?
Yes. So I count. There are 40 physicians were converted in the database. The database contains today around 1,000, more or less. It's a huge number, and then you see it covers from Islam, 11th century till 16. So it's not. So I want to ask: can we consider physicians as a unique group of converts? I mean, is there any is a better chance for a physician in those days to convert to the ruling religion? I don't know. I think it's overwhelming. If you want to check other profession, we can compare. Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Lawyers.
There are not lawyers, but there is one tax collector.
Lawyers could be only false converts.
No, I mean, let's see the list.
Contract.
You see, actor.
Not yet.
One.
You have like katips.
Khatibs. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there are, but I mean it's
like clerks.
clerks. I mean it will be. I check almost everyone. Believe me, the second largest is maybe 5, and it was also, and there were also physicians, so physician and philosopher, or physician and astronomer. So there is something about physicians. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a nice.
They need to be trusted.
We can explain.
What?
We can explain a little bit.
Yeah, you know, there is Rome wrote an article a few years ago about Jewish intellectuals that convert, but intellectuals at all you can realize because they dealing with text, they are dealing with the other religion. Look, I don't have answers. Only questions. So when I first intended to show it, I wanted to choose one particular person, Ibn Kamuna, because he wrote something very interesting in his book. He explained about conversion. That is why, to this day, we never see anyone converting to Islam unless in terror or in quest of power, or to avoid heavy taxation, or to escape humiliation, or if taken prisoner, or because of infatuation with Muslim women, or for some similar reason. Nor do we see a respected, wealthy, and pious non-Muslim well-versed in both his faith and that of Islam going over to the Islamic faith without some of the aforementioned constitutional qualities. He himself was converted also. So I think I'll stop here because there is a question that you told you have an explanation. I think it will be nice to hear, really. So that's it. I mean, I took it to another direction, and you can do it whatever you want with it now.
Yeah. It has to be said before you start that the database has about 1,000 entries, so in no way can it be said that it's all-encompassing, and therefore, and it could very well be the doctors are overrepresented just because of the material that's been, or physicians, just because of the material that's already been entered, compared to other areas and materials that haven't
I can add more. At least 30% of the converters doesn't have profession written, so it make it even higher in a statistical rate. And you can see I don't know of any such data that can in one click you can see a map of people convert according to each what you want to ask. I mean, profession, from what religion to what years. You can do it. You can do here magnificent things, and really, I think it's the first time that such thing can be done.
The floor is now open if anyone wants to discuss the text, the papers, questions, and Daniele won't answer, but people here will. Oh, okay, let's go around the table. Dov first, and we'll go around that way.
Perhaps.
Okay, Tom.
I gladly.
Oh, okay.
First,
I just have a question about a matter of detail that in the document that we read, where it says that they brought him to the altar of Saint Joachim of Arles as he was dressed, and there they accomplished 6 orders. And he was, I don't understand what that means. I don't have any idea what's behind it. And it's only complément 6 order. Does anybody know what that refers to? It's a very striking phrase.
Would it be prayers? Prayers, I think. I thought about prayers.
Sexual vision prayer.
Yeah.
It says, and he was accomplished. Does he have to say something to complete his conversion?
It's a little bit confusing because you have the language of orders applied to the ordination of priests. They go through different orders before they attain the priesthood. In medieval ordination rites, I mean, you had the order of deacon, of exorcist. Well, here is a baptism of a new convert, not a...
And you also have the language of ordo for the stage directions.
I had actually the same question. I was curious how it applies, I mean, to...
And I don't know why you would accomplish 6 or complete 6 of those. It doesn't seem like the word you would use for prayers. It seems like you would say prayers. Yeah, you would use it. I just want, I don't have any suggestion.
I don't have any suggestions different than a prayer.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think about.
Sure.
Ram, I'd like to hear more about, you hinted at the end that Isaac Natan has in mind that certain aspects of truth in Christianity from his other parts of his book, which you didn't get into. I'd like you could tell us more about what you had in mind when you...
Well, this paragraph is part of Mehmet's Koach, which is a very big treatise, a moral treatise, and the structure of this treatise is the Christian theological doctrine of the 7 deadly sins and the 4 virtues. And he decided in the preface to this work, he says that he sees good ideas in Christian theology, and he doesn't think that he should avoid adapting them because it is Christian. And he speaks about this system, this theological system, and he built his work on this system. And he has also others, Christian ideas in his book. He's trying to, in some of parts of this treatise, to put together Jewish and Christian ideas. Some of them are from even from the New Testament.
If I may jump in, from your text, it seems that it has something to do with monasticism, because of the fraternity, because of tzedakah, because of the kind of life that the converts were living.
Why the necessary? It would seem more like a fraternity or a charitable fraternity, very typical
Christian confraternity.
In 15th century art, there were several Christian fraternities there, not one. I think like 5 or 6 Christian fraternity, and also a Jewish fraternity, one Jewish fraternity in the community of art. So it was part of the social life, social religious life. Yes. So maybe monasticism also, because there is a long discourse, a very big discourse with monasticism in this treatise in Mehmet's Koach. Yeah, he speaks about Vicente Ferrer. There is another description of a Christian preacher, I don't know who, an anonymous, that preaches in art. And another example about the Carmelite Thomas Connecte, who preached all over Northern Europe and was finally burned by Eugene IV in 1433. So he has a long discourse with monasticism there. Yes, and also an example about a Franciscan who collects books and money and things like this, and so yeah, many stories about about mendicants and preachers, but the fraternity, maybe it's a different phenomenon, not connecting to this.
Just apropos of the yeshiva on the mountain, I published a letter from a Christian Hebraist who writes in Hebrew, Nichtav be'ir b'yeshiva ha'muhulala, and then in Latin letters, Kanta Brigiai. So that's Amir's second home, yeshiva, ear of yeshiva muhulala, from 1641. 1641. So yeshiva.
Cambridge is a yeshiva.
Well, in the yeshiva world here, they say Kollel is a university because
now they're actually doing
right. Let's just make a pretty basic observation that brings together Rami's and Amir's talks. It may well be that what we're looking at here are people that have some kind of access, both cultural and social, and that's exactly what makes the physicians in that position. It's not that they're physicians, but rather, of course, that they have come in contact, just like the haute bourgeoisie that you mentioned, which also, I would assume, had more contacts. Now, this is pure speculation, so if it's worth anything, just include it.
They also knew Latin. They were the segment of the Jewish population that knew Latin.
I agree, yes, I agree. But what distinguished, I mean, can I ask if they are distinguished between the intellectual? Are the physicians a distinguished group? I mean, we have to ask it. I don't know.
I think it's a broader phenomenon, and of course Danny can attest to that. That many people who were intellectuals and who were learned in many facets of science practiced medicine to a certain extent, whether they were trained physicians, especially from the later medieval period, where we have proper academies for training physicians in Montpellier and in Salerno and so on, and Jews actually are towards the end of the Middle Ages, they're admitted, and as we heard from Ram, are trained and have their own, have received degrees and licensed to practice medicine. And of course, these people are of a larger, with larger expertise, with a wider spectrum of interest.
Yeah, well, there's a long tradition that goes back to a figure that we don't know anything about, that Gad Freudenthal is trying to, like Doeg Haidomi, right, who is
12th century,
and who translates from I hope I get it right now, Latin into Hebrew, right, about 24 works, and then you have Naamat Cohen-Anegbi, who from Tel Aviv University, I think, University, who gave us an incredible paper. Do you remember those of us who were in Geneva at the conference where she showed that Jeanne of Avignon, right, where she translates translates from the Latin into Hebrew, and there are places within the medical works where there are Trinitarian or Christological ideas. And then the question is, what do you do with them? Right? Do you translate them and keep them in for the Jewish audience, or right, do you skip over them, or try and find a way around them? So I guess, following on from what's been said here, I guess there are those who know this culture so well and are attracted to it and they convert, and there are others who manage to combine between the two, right? And are able to work within both cultures.
I want to make a comment on that and add a question or another comment. First of all, something about physicians. We know that not only within the circles of trained physicians who were students of an academy, but rather people who are practicing medicine on a more parochial level, there is a very clear and hands-on knowledge of what is going on in the Christian world, even to the point where we have within halachic texts that are copied, and this is something I've worked on during my dissertation, halachic texts that are copied And then on the margin of these texts, or on the leftover pages, we have incantations, chants that are used for medical practices that have very typically Christian ways of medicine and charms and so on. So we've even beyond the scope of the learned elite, that is these scientists who practice medicine, we have a knowledge of what is going on, and there is a kind of a channel of funneling through all kinds of bodies of knowledge that are not necessarily within the fold of what we consider practicing Judaism. That's one comment. The other comment is that you were discussing the treatise of Arnodus of Villanova, which is also very well known in Jewish circles. Arnodus is, of course, referred to as Magistri Arnav, which is also really sweet. They give him his own name, and of course it's an abbreviation of Arnodus, but it's Arnaud and it's Arnav with a bet, so there's also a pun there.
I'm not sure because the Vav and the Bet I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe. I think it's.
Arnav means a rabbit.
Then maybe Maurice can elaborate.
Dr. Buck's body.
But you were referring to a hidden treatise or something that is kept in a secret room, or at least in the teachers' rooms, and is not accessible in the library. And we have a very similar tradition within this Jewish side, where medical knowledge is restricted, and I've found a few medical, not treatises, but charms and amulets that specifically say this should not be shown to a Gentile. In other words, this is restricted to our fold. We don't share this kind of knowledge. And here you're suggesting someone who has managed to bridge that gap from the Jewish world and access something that may have been prohibited from Jews, but he's extracting it from a Christian context, a scientific Christian context, and bringing it into the Jewish fold, and by that becoming a conduit of knowledge that kind of funnels in, and maybe is the platform for conversion.
Two observations, an observation on each of the two texts by Saknata. The first one. Saknata, he speaks about a sermon by Ferrer, or perhaps another preacher, if it is not Ferrer, that told that Jews shed the blood of Jesus, and as a result, their punishment is that they have a problem with their blood. They urinate blood, or worms will be found in the mouth. Now, already in the 13th century, Thomas de Contemplé, the preacher in the middle of the 13th century, has the story that he tells a long story about a case of blood libel in the city of Pforzheim in Germany. A very interesting story in itself. And afterwards he has another long discussion and says, generally I believe that indeed the blood accusation is true, and I've been informed about that by a convert, which I asked. And then he says, I know also why this happened, that they have the Jews to shed the blood of Christians. It is because they shed the blood of Christ. And he has what Irvin Resnick has written about that. He has a long, a bit intricate phrase, sentence, which may be interpreted that Jewish males have menstruation, and this is the result of the fact that they shed the blood of Jesus. Here you have something that is not very far from that, this kind of elaboration on an imagination about blood. It seems to me that it is. This is the first thing that you want to do. The second thing is to the second text. So you have this wild discourse about the blood of the Jews and the menstruation of Jewish males, etc. Yitzhak Natan explains that because of those lies, because of this wild discourse, the Jewish converts create their own fraternities where their Jewishness is going on in one way or another. Now, that there were converso fraternities immediately after the mass conversions of the 1410s, this is for sure. We know, for example, in the city of Perpignan, this has been published again in the book by Fage, which I mentioned yesterday and that you know very well. Now it is online in Gallica, so it's easier to read.
The book about Ferrer.
The book about Ferrer, yes. The Jews in Ferrer was in Perpignan, if I'm not mistaken, at the time that King Sigismund, the Emperor Sigismund, met the King of Aragon in order to have Benedict XIII discarded, within the, and then Jews in Perpignan were converted, massively converted. Immediately after that, the text has been published by Fage. There is the creation of a fraternity of conversos. The same happens, we have the text that has been published in Sefarad and in other journals, in Barcelona and in Valencia. So, this is true what he says, that there are fraternities. You can imagine that, you have a people in a Jewish quarter, they become Christians, well, they are yet a social unit, they immediately become a Christian confraternity. Now, will it become a social framework for their own specificity or not? This is another story. He makes a case that they used it in order to stay Jewish, etc., etc. This, perhaps it is true, perhaps it is not. What I understand that what he wants to say is that the wild anti-Jewish discourse brought the converts away from Christianity, and that brought them back to their own, in a way, identity, or whatever you want to call that, without the term identity, it doesn't matter. And so you have here immediately, in the middle of the 15th century, the idea that anti-Jewish discourse brings Jews back to their, to themselves, as it were.
I don't know if back, but
and this is this will something that will be developed in afterwards. For example, the well-known preacher of the Jews in the new community of Amsterdam. What's his name? I don't know. His name is, I know only him, and his name escapes me at the moment. A sermon by him has been published by Saperstein. Mortera, yeah. Mortera says that anti-Semitism, if I can use the word freely, has been implanted by God in the hearts of non-Jews in order to keep Jews Jewish. And you could say that after this has been published by Saperstein. You could say that what Spinoza will say afterwards on anti-Semitism as the food and as the real cause of the Jewish existence is a secularization of this idea that he heard around in Amsterdam. In a way, this is already found in this text. Immediately, in the middle of the 15th century, there were these wild preachers. The new Christians did not find, they were uneasy with that. Some Jews thought, well, perhaps they will not integrate the larger society, etc., etc., please keep them Jewish. So you have the whole context. Now, a word about Ibn Kamuna. It seems to me that Ibn Kamuna, he had strong convictions against, it seems to me, perhaps I'm mistaken, against all the monotheistic and especially faiths, and especially against Islam.
Yes, but he was, we're not sure, but he apparently was converted to Islam. So,
for all the reasons given.
Yeah. For one of them, yeah, or all.
Anna?
Yeah, I was going back to the 6 orders from, and I was checking. The problem, I think, is we know so little about the ceremonies that of christening and the rites, but it seems to me from the Provençal part that what we are seeing here is a change of robes. Because if you go to the second text that Daniele is presenting, there are 6 layers of clothes. So once you are baptized in the tent, you are taken into the church, and like the priest, you are undressed and redressed with the new clothes that symbolize your new faith, which are paid by the king. And then he comes out and thanks the king for his
for his gift. Because it says first that he comes as he is.
That's it. He comes dressed as he is, and then he gets in, he gets the 6 layers, he comes out and thanks the king. So I think it has to do with that. And I'm insisting on this because I will be talking about it on Thursday. So.
While all of you were talking, I've been looking through every Latin text on baptism that I could find in the Patrologia. Ordines baptismi. But I think actually, it may connect, after all, to the idea that baptism initiates Christians into their universal priesthood. So many, perhaps, the 6 layers of clothing are attached to 6 different levels of priesthood, symbolically imposed on any baptism.
I think it may have to do with that. And then I had another thing about the physicians, but I was curious about what Claude had to say about it.
No, nothing new. You said
yeah, mine is not new either, but it's just in Mudéjar times they have a very peculiar status, and we find these Muslim physicians and midwives who are very much reputed in Christian Iberia, and the kings will hire them for their own use, plus the archbishops, everybody. So then when they become Moriscos, what we find is that the problem is not so much conversion as the professionalization of medicine. And then they are not, for a start, they are not authorized to go into university if they are not Christians. But then at some point there's a prohibition of exercising medicine if they don't have a university degree. So in the 1520s, I think, or something like this, even Moriscos who used to be taught at home have to go through university to get a university degree if they want to exercise medicine. So then we find Morisco physicians who are converts, but of course they have to go through university. So there's so many layers in, I think, in the career of physicians that it's a bit difficult to know what they went through in a way. I don't know.
Yes, I don't want to speak on the physicians because you, Efi, and Nimrod, and others said what I wanted to, but instead I want to follow Maurice commentaries on Iancu-Agou, saying 3 things. The first one is that as far as I remember Fray Vicente Ferrer's sermons, he has nothing to do with that. It's a completely distorted caricature. On the contrary, Vicente Ferrer, he emphasized over and again that Jesus Christ was a Jew and the Virgin Mary was a Jewess, etc., etc. And the vision of Vicente Ferrer has nothing to do with racism. I think that this kind of distortion of Vicente Ferrer has to do with what Maurice said. That Vicente Ferrer was very successful. He was successful as in missionizing, converting Jews, and the result were that they were sincere and very valuable Christians who came up as Christians in consequence of this very successful missionary activity. Then on the one hand, perhaps Iancu-Agou has to denigrate Vicente Ferrer in order more or less to have
to have a kind of answer. At the same time, the result we have here, and I don't know the Amir-Ashur, and you know that, is that what he's depicting here, look, is a kind of utopian or ideal idea of Judaism, a kind of depured idea of Judaism. This is going to be Judeo-Christianity at its best in some respects. On the one hand, it is Jewish because they are Jews who are coming together. But on the other, it's a kind of depurated Christianity. And perhaps this is an indirect criticism or reference against, maybe against halakhic Judaism, since here, and only here, you can perhaps produce people who are men of grace, men of action, men of truth, men of good deeds, notables. That is, this very sad situation perhaps created, I don't know, what could be seen as kind of a utopian idea of Judeo-Christianity. I am wrong, I am right. And you know better what this finally leads me to propose a final name to the list. You propose Hamadidi in the sense of looking at non-Jews not only as pagans, but valuable people too. And Maurice proposed Mortera as a kind of counterverse to Spinoza's explanation of Jewish specificity and heartfelt. And here I will finally propose the in-between name of Ibn Verga, because it is something in between, you know. Christianity and Judaism is not completely or denigrated totally or idealized totally, but it's depend on, and even Verga is showing that reality is much more complex than ideology.
I completely agree with you both. I mean, I find it's not the only idea. There are other notions in the Amir-Ashur that we can define proto-Spinozic thought in Yitzhak Natan that leads from him into Ibn Verga, Shevet Yehuda.
We discussed
this in Zichron Yaakov, but on another theme about the
biblical commentary.
Yes,
the reading of the Bible.
Yeah, so others' ideas as well. So I see, yes, a direct link from Yitzhak Natan to Ibn Verga and then to Spinoza.
Yes,
started from Amir.
Yeah, because Amir, yes.
If you want to be radical, you could just say it starts with Joachim of Theology.
Just a quick note to Dov. It's true that I don't know any passage that Ferrer speaks about there, about Jews being punished for shedding the blood of Christ. But and there is this new tendency to try to kind of give Ferrer a new more friendly face. But his sermons are very, very, very hostile and defiling to Jews.
Yes.
So given in this context, and given Maurice, if I understood it, suggested maybe it's not Ferrer because it's not written.
No, it says Maestro Vincent.
Maestro Vincent.
Yeah, it's.
But and given the kind of other ideas that were running in this time, we think about what we find in Alonso de Espinas and the blood and very similar accusations. So it's not too far-fetched to make this kind of allegation, even if
concerning
we don't know. What's that?
It would be unfair to, as far as I remember, maybe I am wrong. I am very unfair to transform Vicente Ferrer in a kind of proto-racist. He wasn't at all. He could be very harsh against Jewish blindness, against the Jewish law.
No, but against contacts with real Jews. I'm not talking about the theological way, about the kind of regulations that he wanted to inflict on Jews.
Yes.
So it's I'm not talking wasn't just on the theological level. On the theological level, he was a Thomist.
But it was against Judaism, not against per se.
But he pushed for segregation.
Yes.
Segregation, yes.
Yes.
No?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So not just Judaism, also real Judaism.
As a coactio indirecta, coactio indirecta, convert.
And together with the Valladolid laws.
Yes.
Spanish the 20th century.
So what about the physicians?
Sorry?
What was their resistance?
טוב שברופאים הרוב. They left lunch. לגיהנום, לא? Last remark before we hear a bit about what's happening tomorrow and the rest of the plan for the evening.
No, my remark regards the ceremony of baptism, and we have something a bit similar, although not so detailed, when King Charles VIII comes to Italy. He comes through Florence. And in Florence, one Jew comes to him and is ready to be baptized. So the king holds him over the baptismal font and gives him his name, Charles. So we have this, and the interesting thing is that he is also of the same lineage. He is also an Angevin king. So this propensity to convert people in person. It is very interesting and maybe something in the ideal of the Christian king held by the Angevin kings.
It was done by French kings as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I may add something. It's Louis of Anjou on the Council of Basel. The decree on Jews and Neophytes is being discussed. And they want to, it's always the problem that when a Jew converts, he loses his property to the prince, to his king or to the prince, and so they want to forbid it. Okay, and the one who opposes this plan is the ambassador of King Louis of Anjou. And so they decide, okay, when they don't have to, we admonish them to leave the convert his property, but we do not excommunicate the prince who takes it. So maybe, but there's also another side to the story.
Okay, so I think we did pretty well with and before we head off to supper and the bus, which will again be where we got on yesterday. Iancu-Agou, if you haven't yet met him, then you'll hear more from him tomorrow. Would like to say a few words about what's happening in the morning.
Yes, so tomorrow we're going to take a tour in the wine hot furnace that we were talking about yesterday. So just one sentence about what we're going to do and what you need to bring. We're going to visit 3 sites, 2 archaeological sites, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Just not more than a few hundred meters of walking in the archaeological site, which is maintained and straight. Some steps and that's it. And around noon we're going to be in the nature reserve. We're supposed to be this partially shadowed and there's some water. We cannot go into the water although we would like, but there are some water. And over there we have a hiking route of about 500 meters each way. And if you want, if you dare, we can climb up a set of stairs and walk another 500 meters each way. So all in all, 2 kilometers for the bravest of you. And of course, all depends on the weather. And we finish in the restaurant dinner in Speramon. And what we ask you to bring is just light clothing and sunscreen. We will supply the hats and water. Plenty of water. If you want, you can bring more hats, more water. And that's it. Yes. And 8:15, we meet near Aroma, so everyone can get their coffee.
So let's say you can be in Aroma at 8:15. I think the bus is supposed to leave at 8:30.
So
the
we
bus
want
will
to
leave
leave
from
at
outside.
8:30.
From outside. And for those who don't like getting up early in the morning, they can continue sleeping on the bus after they have.
About walking shoes, bring whatever is comfortable for you to walk in. You don't have to bring hiking boots. If you're okay with sandals, you can bring them. If you feel better with shoes, bring your shoes. Not like dinner shoes or something.
Okay, so
in a tie.
So thank you everyone. It's been a great.